Napoleon at Tor House, a porthole story by Douglas A. Borer, a Tor House docent. The following story was told and repeated in good faith, but will now be put under the demanding glare of history's spotlight. The story ties the French Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte to a local Monterey Peninsula landmark, Tor House, the stone home of Robinson and Una Jeffers. She, Una Jeffers, was Robinson's wife, life partner, literary agent, and muse for much of his poetry. He, Robinson Jeffers, was the legendary American poet who graced the cover of Time magazine in 1932 and produced 20 volumes of poetry before his death in 1962. Robinson and Una moved to the peninsula from Los Angeles in 1914 and settled in Carmel, a location he would later describe as our inevitable place. 4 years later, in 1918, after receiving an inheritance, they began a decades-long labor of love, the building of Tor House and Hawk Tower, which is the focus of this story. Standard legend speaks of a 19th century sailing ship named Inconstant, a two-masted brig launched in 1811. The Jeffers' unique connection with the Inconstant is literally set in stone and written down in family documents. The porthole on the right is from the ship Inconstant, later renamed Natalia, which was wrecked in Monterey Bay in the 1830s. This is the ship which Napoleon escaped from Elba and then returned to France and began the 100-day period prior to his defeat at Waterloo. The porthole on the right was purchased by Una and set into the tower by Robinson in 1923. My dear readers, we have arrived at Napoleon's porthole, the focus subject of this narrative. 54 years later, when Tor House Foundation began offering guided tours in 1977, tour docents passed the Napoleon porthole story onto legions of visitors to the Tor House compound. Then another 40 years went by until at the top of the tower one fine November day, a Tor House guest asked me, how did the ship get from Europe to the Pacific shores? And why was it renamed Natalia? I scratched my head and replied, I do not know, but if you come back in a month or two, I will have the facts you seek. Thus began my history quest. In the age of the internet, the research data came quickly. First, a confirmation that Napoleon's ship did sink in Monterey Bay, according to a story published in the San Francisco Call in the year 1899. The newspaper cites two human sources, both elderly shipmasters in Monterey. The first one, Captain Lambert, is described as an old and highly respected resident of Monterey, a man of most striking and magnetic presence, coupled with great intelligence. According to Lambert, oh, you need have no doubts as to the authenticity of the ship. She is the same bit of marine architecture that carried Napoleon to France upon his escape from Elba, when he started out on his last wild rampage with the avowed intention of changing the political geography of the world. It is probably safe to assume that this Captain Lambert was the same Thomas Lambert who, with his wife Sarah, served as the caretakers of the custom house in Monterey in the second half of the 1800s. However, the well-trained newspaperman sought confirmation of Lambert's story. He found it in one Captain Brawley, a contemporary of Lambert's. According to Captain Brawley, I arrived in Monterey on Admiral Sloat's flagship, the Savannah, in 1844. We were warned by the harbor master to beware of our anchorage, as a Mexican revenue cutter had been sunk and her upper works came very near the surface. She was undoubtedly the ship that carried Napoleon from Elba to France just previous to the Battle of Waterloo. At this stage, based on the newspaper story, I was confident that the story told by the Jeffers family was indeed true. But what else could I find to corroborate the history? Again, the internet proved easy access to more information. I used Google and queried Mexican ship Natalia, Monterey. Here is what I found in an official California history document on shipwrecks. A Mexican company bought the brig Natalia in Acapulco on June 21st, 1834 for $14,000. The Natalia set sail from San Blas, Mexico for Monterey, California on August 1st, 1834 under the command of Captain Juan Gomez. In Monterey Harbor on the afternoon of 21 December 1834, a storm struck and the ship's anchors parted. The ship sank. This source confirms the Jeffers story. However, unfortunately, I read on, and in the final sentence of the report, the first shadow of doubt is born. Bancroft noted that the Natalia was often confused with the ship Inconstant, which carried Napoleon from Elba. When I read that line, my heart nearly stopped, not wanting to ruin a good tale. I asked in indignation, who the heck is this upstart Bancroft? I realized, of course, the implications. If the Inconstant had not been renamed Natalia, and Natalia was a different ship, then the story told since 1924 about the right side porthole in Hawk Tower being Napoleon's porthole would not be true. It turns out that Bancroft is, of course, Hubert Howe Bancroft, California's most famous historian of the 19th century. At this point, I was a bit grim, but I continued my research. Alas, it turns out the Jeffers family fable about the right side portal high aloft in Hawk Tower being from Napoleon's ship Inconstant collapses very rapidly when one consults official French naval archives and a variety of other sources, such as Wikipedia. Wikipedia lists the following, which tells us a good deal about the fate of the vessel Inconstant in the 3 decades after Napoleon's defeat at Waterloo on 8 July 1815. The French Navy reintegrated Inconstant into the Royal Fleet in March 1815, and it was returned to service. It was rebuilt at Toulon in 1822. It took part in the Spanish expedition in 1823, which restored the monarchy in Spain. Between 7 April and 26 November 1823, the ship sailed to Brazil and was on the Brazil station for much of the next 2 years. She returned to France from Brazil and was at the naval school from 1827 to 1829. From 1829 to 1832, she was again in Atlantic waters off Canada and off Brazil and underwent a refit in 1834. The ship Inconstant then went to Senegal and returned to Europe, went again to the coast, the Atlantic coast of South America, and returned to France in 1841. However, the ship was condemned on 17 August 1842 and was broken up at the dry dock at Brest in 1843. The end of the story. Here, we must conclude that the delightful Jeffers family fable about the origins of the fine old bronze portal fails a formal fact check of history. However, there is a genuine portal. You can touch it, open it, and see through it today. Undoubtedly, that portal came from a ship that sank in Monterey Bay, but the truth is the ship was not Napoleon's vessel, the Inconstant, which had never been sold and renamed and sold to and sailed to Monterey Bay. Why did the gray-haired Monterey captains Lambert and Brawley fashion this fable? Perhaps the answer is not that complicated. When their seafaring days are behind them, it is the organic nature of ancient mariners to spin great yarns, and for the rest of us to enjoy them in good humor or not. I will conclude this by saying Robinson Jeffers often interlaced history in his work. Thus, it is only fitting that we finish this story with one of my favorite poems, and one that foreshadows a future that a historian might see looking back. This poem is titled Tor House. If you should look for this place after a handful of lifetimes, perhaps of my planted forest, a few may stand yet, dark-leaved Australians, or the coast cypress, haggard with storm drift, but fire and the axe are devils. Look for foundations of sea-worn granite. My fingers had the art to make stone love stone. You will find some remnant. But if you should look in your idleness after 10,000 years, it is the granite knoll on the granite and lava tongue in the midst of the bay by the mouth of the Carmel River Valley. These four will remain in the change of names. You will know it by the wild sea fragrance of wind, though the ocean may have climbed or retired a little. You will know it by the valley inland that our sun and our moon were born from, before the poles changed, and Orion in December evenings was strung in the throat of the valley like a lamp-lighted bridge. Come in the morning, you will see white gulls weaving a dance over blue water, the wane of the moon, their dance companion, a ghost walking by daylight, but whiter and whiter than any bird in the world. My ghost you needn't look for. It is probably here, but a dark one, deep in the granite, not dancing on wind with the mad wings and the day moon. Thank you.